Hi guys, welcome back to Living the Gandy Life. Today I want to share with you guys something that's personal. I want to share with you why we chose to homeschool. And before I even get started, I just want to preface with that these are personal reasons. Everyone's reasons as to why they homeschool should and will look different because we are all different and we all choose to homeschool for different reasons. I also just right off the bat want to state that there's no right way or wrong way to educate your children. This just happens to be what we have chosen for our family. So please don't misconstrue my words or think that I believe that everyone should be homeschooling or that homeschooling is the only way to educate. It just happens to be what we have chosen for our family. So let me start by going back several years. One of the very first years that I was homeschooling, I went to a homeschool conference, and the speaker at this conference, right off the bat, just asked everyone, "What is your red hot why?" And at that time, I didn't even know what they were referring to, and you may not either, so let me explain. As he continued to speak, he said, "Your red hot why is like your backbone to your homeschool. It's why you are homeschooling. It's the very core truth and what has led you to homeschool. And it's what's going to keep you afloat on those challenging days." So plainly put, your red hot why was why you chose to homeschool. And like I said, it was something that needed to be strong enough to support you on the days where you felt like you were going to throw in the towel. When you saw a yellow school bus driving outside your house and the temptation crossed your mind, like, man, it would be a whole lot easier if I just booted my kids out the front door. You needed these truths to fall back on so that when you had those thoughts of, I can't do this, I'm done, I'm over it, that you would refer back to these red hot whys. Why did you initially decide to homeschool? So as a family, and it's kind of evolved over the course of the last 6 years that we've been homeschooling, we have generated a list of our 5 red hot whys, the 5 reasons why we homeschool. And if you're new to homeschooling, or if you don't have a list of reasons why you homeschool, I would really encourage you to really just set aside some time, kind of meditate on the reasons why you decided to homeschool, and come up with this list so that when those challenging days come, notice I said when, I didn't say if the hard days would come, because the hard days do come. But you have these reasons to fall back onto to remind you of why you made the decision that you did. So this brings me to my list, and I'm actually going to start with number 5 and work down to number 1. But number 5 is actually twofold. It is actually redemption and fostering, and those words won't mean a lot to you. So what I mean is redemption as in redeeming our education, and fostering meaning fostering a love for learning. So with redemption, I mean, this kind of applies to my husband and I, that we are redeeming our education. So how many people can say that they listened, they remember, that they loved everything that they learned in their own education? My husband and I could not be, there probably are people out who could say that, but my husband and I were not a part of that group. We remembered very little. We did not enjoy school as much. And what we remember actually was learning the material long enough to pass a test, and then it kind of went in one ear and out the other. That was our, experience with school. My husband and I never loved history, and now that we're teaching it to our kids, we're finding that we actually really love history, and we are loving this opportunity to be relearning all of these things over again and learning alongside our children. So that's one of the main reasons that we love it, and I think this is more of a byproduct that we get to learn these things again. We have the time, we have the need to relearn these things so that we're teaching them to our kids, but byproduct is that we're learning them as well. And a lot of times it feels like we're learning them for the very first time. Now, on the flip side of this coin is that we wanted to give our kids a love for learning so that someday they don't find themselves in our shoes where they're having to relearn all of these things that they don't feel like they ever learned in the first place. I'm sure you can relate that when you actually have a vested interest, when you actually enjoy something, you learn it, you retain it, you hold on to it for a whole lot longer. We're seeing that in our own kids. When we let them follow an interest and study it on their own, the facts that these kids can remember. They're like little sponges. And when they enjoy it, they hold on to it a whole lot more. So we're trying to foster that love of learning in them so that when they are our age, that they're not having to redeem their own education. They just had it all along. All right, this brings me to our next reason, number 4. And number 4 is freedom and flexibility. And this is so multifaceted. The first one is the freedom and flexibility to learn what we want when we want. So I've mentioned before in other videos that we do love to let our kids take some interest-led learning, and we have the opportunity, we have the freedom and the flexibility to do that. When my kids were interested in birds, we studied birds. They are interested in Lego stop motion right now, so we are studying Lego stop motion. They have been interested in cars, and we have studied cars. Whatever it is, we have allowed their interests to lead the way into some of our learning. The other one is that we have the freedom and flexibility to travel when we want. We're not held to a traditional, public or private school schedule where, you're going to travel in the summer or over winter break or spring break. We try to travel actually when nobody else is going to be traveling, because that makes those hot spots a little less congested. So we like to travel in February. I've mentioned this before. We like to leave Ohio in February because it is so cold and gloomy and winter just drags on forever. So we love to travel in February. We love to travel after traditional school has started and a lot of places have died down. So we love to go places in September and October. We also love to go places before school lets out in like April or May. Again, trying to avoid these high traffic times when a lot of people are going to be at all these places. So when you homeschool, you don't have to worry about missing classes or being gone so many certain days. We just kind of make up what we need to, or count our travel and our travel experiences as our learning as we go. We always like to hold to that belief that learning doesn't have to look like your traditional sit at a desk, do a worksheet, do a math problem. Learning can happen through traveling, through experiencing, through seeing the actual historical sites and the places that we visit as we travel. We also love the freedom and flexibility to enjoy an impromptu park day or no school day. If it's the middle of winter and you have just dreary days and all of a sudden there's this warm 50-degree day that just pops up in the middle of the week, we throw our books to the side and we just take off. We call a friend, have them meet us at the park, go on a hike, do something like that. Like, you don't have to follow the traditional school schedule of, you can only be outside after a certain time. We just kind of pick up and go when the weather is nice. In the same likeness, you have the freedom and flexibility to choose to go to those hot spots around your city during the week instead of waiting until the weekend. We love to go to the zoo and museums and science centers during the week so that we can avoid the high traffic times on the weekend. So we almost always try and schedule those trips during the week when everyone else is in school. Another one is that you have the freedom and flexibility to do school on a weekend. So maybe you did throw your school to the side. Maybe you had a rough day, or you had a sick day, or you went to the park during the middle of the week and now you want to do some school on the weekend. That's totally okay. You can have your classes on a Saturday. You could have them on an evening. You could do 2 days in one day so that you could have another day off. You have the freedom and flexibility to determine your own schedule when you want to do school or when you're not going to. All right, on to reason number 3. And our reason number 3 is innocence. So we as parents decided that we wanted to preserve our child's innocence as long as possible. We wanted them to be kids for as long as possible. Kids should be kids, right? We know the old saying that once you see something, once you hear something, you cannot unsee it and you cannot unhear it. And we didn't want to take that risk with our kids. We wanted them to be kids for as long as possible. Rather than letting a school district or kids on the bus or kids in a class or, kids on the playground, whatever it is, rather than allowing them to introduce our kids to words, ideas, subjects, different things like that, rather than allowing them to introduce our kids to those topics, we wanted to be the ones that introduce them, to determine, one, when we introduce them, and also to be in an environment when we introduce them that they're not under peer pressure to, follow the status quo, to think something is cool or to think something is okay and it's right. we wanted to be the ones that we were introducing them, be able to explain why we believe what we believe about those things, to explain it from a biblical worldview, and also explain that other people may not believe what we believe. And just because they believe something different doesn't mean that we need to be mean or rude to them, but that rather we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. And so we wanted to be the ones that are explaining it to them with those different ideas behind it. We didn't want someone else guiding their mind to believing that something might be okay when rather we might believe differently. Ultimately, we decided that we wanted to be the ones who determined when it would be appropriate to introduce those things to our kids. Now, this is usually the point when people, kind of come at me with, well, you can't keep them in a bubble their entire life, or, they're going to hear it eventually, or, they're going to be little weirdos that don't know how to interact with people. So I'll just kind of briefly address some of those, because trust me, I've heard those arguments before. So obviously, no, we don't plan to keep our kids sheltered and to not allow them to know the things that exist outside the walls of our home. We know the things that go on outside, and we will expose our children to them when we know that they are capable of understanding. But like I said before, we want to introduce those things in an environment that has zero peer pressure. We don't want them being led to believe that certain things are okay and that certain things are right. We want to introduce them under the auspices of a biblical worldview so that we can discuss, okay, this is wrong, this is why it's wrong, and this is why we believe it's wrong. And some people don't believe that. And leave it at that. We will show them that there are people who believe different things than us, who live differently than us, but we're always taking it back to Scripture and showing them how it does not follow God's design. And yes, there is always the possibility that other kids are going to expose our kids to things before we're ready to them. We don't live in a perfect world. I do think that by being with me the majority of their lives, their window of opportunity gets smaller and smaller. But the reality is we do live in a neighborhood. We do have neighbor kids. They have friends who are not homeschooled, and that's perfectly fine with us. But just because they might be exposed to something before we expose them to it doesn't mean that I want to just rush them out and have them exposed to everything at such a young age. Lastly, I've said it before, but if my kids are little weirdos who love and fear the Lord, I am perfectly okay with them being homeschool weirdos. All right, guys, next one is number 2, and this one is time. And this one's multifaceted as well. Time meaning more time with our kids, more time to pursue our personal interests, and time to move at our own pace. So the first one being time with our kids. I never really felt comfortable having my kids gone from me for 8 hours a day and losing that precious time with them. I wanted them home with me so that we could generate and foster a good relationship between me and each of my children, but also between the relationships, or between all of my children. I wanted all of their relationships to have time to develop and to nurture those as well. And if we were to send them off to school, they would each go in their own separate direction and really wouldn't see each other at all throughout the day. Now they're home with each other. They're each other's best friends. They play together. I mean, trust me, they fight and don't get along plenty, but ultimately they're really good friends and they play together really well. Ultimately, we were really becoming keenly aware that the days are long, and trust me, the days are very long, but the years are short. And we are finding the older that our kids get, the years are very short. They fly by. And I can't imagine, like, we're getting to the point where my oldest is 10 and a half. He'll be 11 in, 5 or 6 months. And if I think of it in the terms of being 18, okay, we only have like 7.5 years left with him. And that's a suffocating thought, that when we're stay-at-home moms or homeschool parents, we're working ourselves out of a job, right? If we do our job well, if we do our job correctly, our kids leave and then we're out of a job. And the thought is very humbling that you want to do a very good job, but at the same time it's saddening because our kids leave. and the idea that we're running out of time in a way with our kids is I wasn't willing to give up that time. I know that even as they get older and they have great friendships and they can learn to drive, that they start to slowly make that trend toward independence. And when they already have extracurriculars in the evening, it was just breaking my heart, the idea of sending our kids away for 8 hours, maybe coming home, having an extracurricular activity, and then after the sport or whatever, to come home from that and then still have more homework. And I was not willing to give up all of that family time, because in reality, we don't have homework as homeschoolers. All of our work is homework. So when we're done with school for the day at 2 o'clock, around 2 to 3 o'clock, we're done. We put the school books away and we don't open them again, which kind of led me to my next point, is that I never really felt guilty about doing any extracurriculars, because we were already home together all day. So if we went to a baseball practice, we weren't losing a lot of family time because we were together all day. But if we hadn't seen each other all day, I think I would have felt worse having sent them or having them away from me for even more time. And, another benefit with our time is that we do have lessons. My oldest takes piano lessons, and so we're actually able to do those during the day and avoid another evening extracurricular activity that would take up some time that we would all be able to spend with their dad. So again, we just have this flexibility with our time to, one, have it all together, but kind of pick and choose things that allow us to have more time together as a family. Another benefit in that with our time is that the actual time that we do school is significantly less than what takes place in a public school. We finish much sooner than we would in a traditional school setting, and that allows my kids to spend the time, once they're finished, pursuing their personal interests. So whether it is birds or cars or Lego stop motion, and you name it. We have studied tons of different little unit studies, but it's all been things that they've been interested in. And so they get to use their extra time in the day to pursue those personal interests. The last one is time. The last aspect of time is that we get to go at the pace of each child. Each of my children learn differently. They learn different in different subjects and at different speeds in all of those different subjects. And so when that particular child is ready to move on, we move on. If they need a little bit more time to explore an area, to understand it, to really grasp it, we spend a little bit more time on it. And that's the beauty of homeschool, is that I am not dictated to a classroom of 25 kids and trying to make sure that I can do the best to make sure that I'm getting all of those kids to move on. I really just have my one kid in each grade, and we're working at their own individualized pace. So I love that about it, because I do have kids all over the board in several different subjects. And they might be really high in one area and really low in another subject. And that's okay. We just move at their pace. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how well my kids would have done in a public school setting. My kids are super quiet until you get to know them. Then they can be extremely loud. But in a school setting, I honestly worried that their very mild-mannered personalities would have allowed them to fall through the cracks. I think if they didn't understand something, they probably were not going to be the kids who raised their hands and said, "I don't understand, can you go over that again?" They just would have quietly flown under the radar and just kept moving on, even though they didn't quite grasp the subject. So I'm glad that they're home with me, and at any point that they don't understand it, I'm right next to them. We go over the concept again. I can see it from the blank stare on their face, or from the fact that we just did a problem and they got it wrong. We work through it again. I don't have to worry about them potentially falling through the cracks. All right, guys, last one, number 1, and it is calling. Plain and simple, we homeschool because it is our calling. We never set out to homeschool. And if you had asked me before I ever had children if I would have homeschooled, I probably would have laughed and said, heavens no. But it's funny how the Lord has different plans for us, because even though I was not planning on it, He certainly had the workings going on behind the scenes long before I ever knew about it. After we had kids, you start to have these discussions about what you're going to do for your kids' education, and I never had peace about sending my kids to a public school, as a lot of my friends started signing their kids up for preschool, the kinds of preschool where you get put on a waiting list and you just cross your fingers and hope that you get in. We weren't doing any of that. We never felt peace about it. And what makes the whole idea even more odd is that both my husband and I were public schooled. Neither one of us had any experience with homeschooling. In fact, we knew some homeschoolers. We knew some homeschoolers that, perfectly depicted your homeschool stereotype, and we just never dreamt that that was what we would actually do with our family. But as I said, God had different plans for our family. And in the end, we wanted our kids to be steeped in the Word of God throughout the entire day. And we wanted Him to be the focus of our school day. We really wanted to be able to point Him out in all subjects and show how God was just present in all things, whether it was going on a walk, the easy things, like you're going on a walk and, can you point out something that God made? Oh, a tree and a bird and all of those things. But we also wanted to point out that, God is in language. We have the Bible that is in written word, and we need to know language so that we can share the gospel. We can see God in numbers, because numbers have order, and our God is a God of order. And so we wanted to be able to point out all of those wonderful ways that God is just present in all things. One of our favorite scriptures, kind of like one of our key scriptures for homeschooling, is Deuteronomy 6. And so, if you have it, or I would suggest reading it, underlining it, keep it ready and handy at all times for homeschooling. It's Deuteronomy 6:4-9. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So ultimately, I kept referring to this scripture that I wanted to teach them diligently, like when you lie down, when you rise, when you walk by the way. That's all day, right? That's homeschool, when they're with you all the time, that you can diligently teach them to your children. So that has honestly become one of our key scriptures for our homeschool. Now, lastly, please don't misinterpret what I say. Please do not think that I believe that there is a one-size-fits-all to education. I make zero assumptions that because I homeschool, that my kids are never going to falter, are never going to question, may never walk away from the Lord. Obviously, I pray that those things do not happen, but I don't believe that just because I homeschool that I'm going to have a perfect Christian child. Obviously, I'm not guaranteed those things. I'm not guaranteed to have a child that never walks away or never questions their faith just because I homeschool. On the flip side, I don't believe that kids who go to a public or a private school, that they won't love the Lord or serve the Lord. Those things happen as well. I just want to make that clear, that I don't believe that just because I homeschool and have a perfect Christian child, or that you can't have a good Christian child who loves and serves the Lord if they go to a public or a private school. All right, guys, there you have it. There are our top 5 reasons, our 5 red hot whys as to why we homeschool. If you don't have a list, I would highly encourage you to make your list for those hard days, to be able to reflect back on and know why deep down you chose to homeschool. That's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. If not, let me know your reasons for homeschooling. I would love to hear from you guys. And until next time, have a blessed day.